Ghost Story, Demons. Author, Night Wind. Clack, clack. A strange sound suddenly rang out in the empty house, located alone in the middle of the wilderness with no one passing by. Tap, clack. An arm suddenly stabbed and emerged in the middle of that gloomy abandoned house. That arm was so black it looked like it was bristling with flesh. "Oh dear country, my house has been stolen again." A woman's voice rang out just as it was just dawn. This caused the neighbors who were sleeping to wake up to go out and look to see what was going on. Ha Village is a village that has existed for a long time. This peaceful village is located in a small district of the old Hung Ha province. The village has always been very peaceful. The people living here put their feelings first. Theft has almost never happened before. Suddenly today, one of the households in the village was stolen, causing everyone to panic and discuss. Less than 10 minutes after the shouts, everyone was rushing to see what was going on. "Miss Lean, what happened at your house?" "Uncle Lean, what's wrong?" A few people spoke up to ask Ms. Lean what was going on. At this time, Mrs. Lean was frowning and continuously cursing. In this village, Mrs. Lean is known as the second most difficult household in the village. The difficulty here is that she is also old, and moreover, she only lives alone with no relatives. Normally, her main job is just working in the fields with a few egg-laying chickens to make a living. Yet today, a thief came to your house, which is truly unbelievable. His father, "My family raised a few chickens and you guys caught them too. You caught them, you ate them, and then you die. Something's wrong, Mrs. Lean." An elderly man's voice rang out from the back of the crowd. The surrounding crowd now all parted ways to let this man walk around to ask questions. Mrs. Lean saw the man and began to cry. "Uncle Tam, my family raises a few chickens, but I don't know which ones are evil. They come in and catch them all." This middle-aged man's name is Tam and is the leader in this village. Mr. Tam frowned. "Can you just calm down and slowly tell everyone here how everything happened?" When Ms. Lean heard Mr. Tam say that, her heart softened. Everyone around at this time saw that what Mr. Tam said was reasonable and encouraged him. "That's right, Mr. Lean, just calmly tell everything. No matter what happens, everyone will help each other." With everyone's encouragement and advice like that, Ms. Lean also listened. Although Mrs. Lean was still very angry in her heart. "Around midnight yesterday, I heard a rattling sound and didn't pay attention to it, because I thought it might be caused by a dog or cat. But lying down and hearing that rattling sound forever makes me feel uneasy. I got up and went outside to take a look, but the door to my chicken coop had already burst open. In the chicken coop, apart from the remaining fluff, I couldn't see anything else." Did Uncle Lean see anything else at that time? After listening to Mrs. Lean's words, a young man accompanying Mr. Tam spoke up and asked. Mrs. Lean shook her head and replied. It was dark at that time and she couldn't see anything. Mr. Tam was still keeping a thoughtful expression on his face. After a while of such silence, Mr. Tam spoke. "Can you take me and everyone to the chicken coop? I want to take a look." Mrs. Lean heard Mr. Tam say that, nodded and led everyone to the chicken coop. Leading everyone to her chicken coop, Mrs. Tu pointed at the empty chicken coop. "There, my father raised a few chickens and he caught them all." Mr. Tam did not say anything but just stared at the scene of the theft. Then he went around looking for more. This. As if discovering something, Mr. Tam gently bent down. Looking under the chicken coop, there is now a group of chicken feathers still mixed with dried blood. Mrs. Lean and a few others now gathered around to observe. No one said a word to anyone. Mr. Tam used his hand to pick up the chicken feather, but as soon as he touched it, a disgusting stench rushed up, causing everyone to cover their nose and turn away. Mr. Tam shook his head. How strange, just a bunch of chicken feathers, how can it smell so bad? Everyone is now shaking their heads because no one knows the reason. Still holding a chicken feather in his hand, Mr. Tam stood up and continued. Everyone, let's go inside the house, there probably won't be any traces left here. Mr. Tam's words sounded reasonable, because around this old, stinky chicken coop, besides the jagged chicken feathers on the ground, there was nothing else. Returning inside the house, Mr. Tam bent down and encouraged Ms. Lean. You don't need to think too much about these chickens anymore. Once I find the culprit for this, I will definitely handle him appropriately to serve as a deterrent to everyone living here. When Mrs. Lean heard Mr. Tam say that, her face became a little happier. Mrs. Lean replied, Yes, I ask you to take care of things, but for many years, our people, from the time of our ancestors until now, have lived together and put love first, and now something like this happens. I'm worried. Mr. Tam understood Mrs. Tu's meaning and also nodded silently. After chatting for a while longer, Mr. Tam asked everyone to disperse because gathering so many people here like this wouldn't solve anything. On the way out, one of the two people accompanying Mr. Tam turned to ask a question with a puzzled face. Uncle Tam, how do you see this? Without any traces like that, I don't think it will be possible to find the culprit. The other person accompanying him also turned around and nodded as if agreeing with the other person's statement. Mr. Tam now does not know what plan to find to catch the culprit, because the thief simply did not leave any trace at all. Walking slowly, Mr. Tam said, Now let's go back to my house first, as for the investigation. Mr. Tam did not speak anymore but continued walking. The other two people did not ask anything else but quietly followed behind. The story of Mrs. Lean's house being stolen spread very quickly. In just a blink of an eye, the rumor spread throughout the village. Some people think it was caused by a dog or cat, but others think the village really stole it. Returning to Mr. Tam's house. Mr. Tam opened the gate and invited two people to go inside the house with him. Entering the house, an old woman was also sitting inside. Apparently this was Mr. Tam's wife. Seeing the three people just entering, Mr. Tam's wife asked, Did everyone go to Ms. Lean's house and discover anything? Mr. Tam did not answer but just shook his head, clicked his lips and walked back to his chair. One of the other two answered instead. Nothing, now Uncle Tam and the rest of us don't know how to find out anymore. After speaking, the two of them went back to their seats. The whole group of people could only look at each other and no one said a word to anyone. Suddenly, Mr. Tam raised his face and spoke in one person's direction. Uncle Tan. Name of one of the two men accompanying Mr. Tam. Mr. Tan raised his eyes. Mr. Tam, just say it. Mr. Tam did not do anything, his expression only calmed down a bit. Right now there is nothing to investigate, but I thought of this plan in the short term to minimize this theft situation from happening again, and also to help everyone have peace of mind. Then, everyone turned their eyes to Mr. Tam and continued to wait to see what Mr. Tam's plan was. Reaching for the cup of tea, Mr. Tam continued. Although our village is small, there are not many young people in the village. Now call them to ask questions. If possible, I will have someone on duty around the village every evening, until everyone has time. to find the person who did the bad deed. After listening, everyone seemed hesitant. After a moment of silence, Mr. Ton spoke up to break the silence. It is true that in the current situation, other than this way to preserve it, there is no other way. The problem here is that if we only worry about the young people in the village who work hard during the day, and at night they have to work hard to support the village, I'm afraid they won't agree. This is indeed the problem that Mr. Tam is thinking about, but besides this, Mr. Tam has not thought of any other solution yet. Mr. Tam lowered his face and said, I know that, but right now I can't find any other way other than this. Uncle Ton, just go and summon them for now, wait until there are enough people and I'll talk about this, no matter what. I'm sure you guys will agree. Mr. Ton heard that and nodded in agreement. Looking outside the door, the sun was now starting to rise. The man and Mr. Ton stood up to ask Mr. Tam and his wife's permission and then left. After the other two left, only the couple remained in the house. Telling Mr. Tam to rest, Mrs. Tam also got up and left to prepare lunch that day. A while later, Mrs. Tam also came up from downstairs, along with a tray full of meat, fish, looking very neat. At this time, just looking at it, we can guess that Mr. Tam's family is also a well-off person in this place. Spreading the mat, placing the rice tray, Mrs. Tam looked up. Let's go down to eat. Mr. Tam looked at his wife, nodded and walked down. Throughout the meal that day, the couple only talked back and forth but never mentioned anything about the village being robbed. Maybe Mrs. Tam also knew that if she said it, it would make Mr. Tam think more and not solve much of the problem. After finishing the meal, Mr. Tam took the opportunity to rest a bit so that he could think about this afternoon's events. In the blink of an eye, it was early afternoon. Mr. Tam immediately sat up, put on a thin shirt and said his wife was at home. He went outside to the yard to talk to the young people. Maybe at this hour, Mr. Ton must have concentrated enough already. Leaving the house, Mr. Tam alone went straight to the village yard, where every time the village organized something, it always took place here. Nearing the place, Mr. Tam saw Mr. Ton and a group of young men sitting there chatting, laughing and joking somewhat loudly. When the village youth saw Mr. Tam coming, they stopped talking and politely said, Uncle Tam is here. What is the matter that requires us to gather here? Mr. Ton now also went to Mr. Tam's place. Counting and counting, there are only a dozen of them still in the village, Mr. Tam. Mr. Tam did not answer anything but went straight to where the young men were. With a gentle smile, Mr. Tam looked at the group and spoke. Actually, I called you here today because I also have something to ask of you. Hearing this, the whole group of young people looked puzzled, and a few questions were also asked. What's going on, Uncle Tam? Mr. Tam pondered and then continued. As you all know, our village has lived together for many generations and has always put emotional issues first and never cared about material things, but now Mrs. Lean's family suddenly has a miscarriage. The story of theft, this has truly broken the so-called emotional tradition of our village. Even as the leader here, I cannot let this matter stand alone. Mr. Tam stopped for a moment and then continued. Uncle and Uncle Ton also went to investigate this morning, but the thief was very cunning and didn't leave any traces. To avoid more bad cases from happening, I would like to ask you to spare some time to become a group on night duty, which is also to protect the discipline of the village. As soon as Mr. Tam finished speaking, the young men's expressions began to show hesitation. They even turned to each other to discuss. Deer was born and raised in this village. Now that something is happening in the village, we can't sit still. Uncle Tam and Uncle Ton can rest assured that this matter will be left to us." The group of young men were still chatting when suddenly someone stepped forward. His voice was firm. That young man's name was Sue, with a strong body and a serious face. Sue is known as one of the hardest working young men in this area. His parents died when he was young and had to live with his grandparents, but when he reached the age of filial piety, his grandparents also left him. Knowing that Sue's situation was difficult but still accepted to help, Mr. Tam could not help but walked over and grabbed his shoulder. Mr. Tam smiled and nodded repeatedly. "Thank you." The group of young men looked back at themselves and then everyone said in unison, "If Mr. Sue says so, we won't be able to sit still. Uncle Tam can rest assured that you will leave the matter of taking care of this place to us." Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton are now indescribably happy, both looking at each other with bright, satisfied smiles. Next, Mr. Tam told everyone to keep quiet to begin dividing the work, and the space in the yard now began to return to a concentrated state. Mr. Tam said, "Even though you are the village's caretaker, you absolutely have to stay safe. I will divide it into 2 groups. Is this your opinion? Is it okay for you guys to see?" The young men turned to look at each other, then said in unison, "That's okay, anyway, having one more person will reduce some of the fear." Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton nodded. Mr. Tam looked at the group of young people then said, "So, tonight, just let me and Ty be on duty the first day, Uncle Tam." Before Mr. Tam could finish his words, Sue stepped up to block him. After speaking, Sue turned to look at a small, slender young man standing next to him. He seemed to be Ty. It seemed that with that small figure, Ty would be shy, but no, Ty's face stiffened and he walked up to look at Sue, nodded in agreement, then turned around and said to Mr. Tam and everyone, "Uncle Tam, Uncle Ton and everyone, just let us 2 be on duty on the first day." Mr. Tam and everyone saw the enthusiasm of the 2 brothers and nodded in agreement. The sunlight was now starting to fade through the mountains. Mr. Tam assigned all the remaining tasks to everyone and then asked everyone to go home to rest to stay healthy for the coming days. Ty's house and Sue's house were also adjacent to each other, so the 2 brothers walked together on the same road home. Even though they don't have any close relatives, the 2 brothers are close together, their family situations are similar, but Ty is a little better because he still has his mother by his side to take care of him. In terms of history, Ty also considers Ty as his younger brother, because Ty's mother is simply very good to Sue. Even when his grandparents are still alive, Ty's mother often comes to help the family. Nearing home, Ty's mother saw the 2 people's silhouettes, came out and said, "How's it going, you 2?" Ty looked at his mother and smiled brightly and replied, "It's nothing, Mom. Uncle Tam told us to split up to work at night for the village." Waiting until the 2 of them entered the house, Ty's mother spoke up. "Uncle Tam thinks so. It's reasonable. You guys should work hard. In the village it's only you guys who can ask for help, not all the old people below. The children know who to turn to." Ty's mother looked at the 2 brothers and continued, "Well, you 2 sit here and talk. I'll go downstairs and prepare food. It's getting dark quickly this season." "Yes." Ty and Sue replied in unison. Ty's mother also turned around and left downstairs. As for the 2 brothers sitting in the house, Ty smiled and ran into the inner room. After a while, he came out. In Ty's hand, there was still a fairly square wooden bar. Looking at Sue, Ty waved the wooden stick and said, "Can you take this wooden stick tonight?" Mr. Su looked at Ty's eagerness to fight and smiled, then raised his hand to signal Ty to give him the stick to see. Understanding what he meant, Ty gave the stick to Su and continued. This tree is always kept in my room, just in case there's a theft or anything else. Su said nothing but held the tree tightly. Lifting up and down, Su said, "The wooden tree is also pretty handy, you can just bring it with you tonight." After speaking, Su gave the wooden stick back to Ty. Leaving it in a corner, Ty returned to sit with Su and said, "About losing the chicken, do you suspect anyone, Mr. Su?" Seeing Ty suddenly ask an incomprehensible question, Su made a puzzled face. "What do you mean, Ty? So why ask?" Ty shook his head. "Then I asked if you suspected anyone." Su replied, "This just happened, and the people in the village have always lived normally, so if I suspect anyone, I can't stand it." At this time, Ty also nodded to indicate that he agreed with Mr. Su's statement. The two Su brothers sat and chatted for a while longer, then Ty's mother also came from downstairs to carry a tray of rice. Looking at both brothers sitting, Ty's mother spoke. "Come on, you two, go wash your hands, feet, face, and nose, then come in and eat." "Yes." Ty and Su said in unison, then turned to help Ty's mother prepare dinner, then together they went to the well outside to wash their hands, feet, and face. Returning to the house, looking back and forth, the sky was now dark. The two brothers quickly went up to eat a bowl of rice so they could proceed with the first night of duty that Uncle Tam assigned them. Ty's mother also saw that the two of them were in a bit of a hurry but didn't say a word. Maybe she knew that the two boys would be on duty for this first night. After finishing dinner, the two sat down to rest for about 10 minutes before Ty went back to the place where the log had been, picked up the log, looked at Su and said, "Let's go, Mr. Su, shall we?" Su turned to look at Ty and then at Ty's mother. Su said, "Yes, let's go, stay home and rest. Ty and I are on duty." Ty's mother looked at the two brothers and nodded. "Yes, you too, remember to be careful." "Yes." The two brothers, Su and Ty, said yes, then turned and left the house. The location where the two brothers were on duty was not far away from the village's yard, partly because this was also a spacious place and a central location. If something happened, all they had to do was shout loudly, "We'll receive help from everyone immediately." It's not far from Ty's house to the yard. However, it is now dark, there are no electric lights, the two brothers in their hands only have two oil lamps with dim light as they walk along the dirt road to the yard. Beach. Out to the yard, the scene at night here was really quiet, although there was still light from the people around, but by the looks on their faces, both of them still seemed a little scared. Ty looked sideways and vertically and said, "It's too dark tonight, if everyone turns off the lights later it won't be a big deal." Also understanding what Ty was worried about, Su replied, "It's okay, if there's any movement, just scream and it's over." While they were chatting, a shadow appeared from the front. Neither of them could clearly see who it was, so they took a defensive stance. "Oh, Uncle Tam." Su spoke up when he realized that the person in front of the two brothers was Mr. Tam, the village chief. Mr. Tam looked at both of them and nodded with satisfaction. "Go check to see if you two have arrived yet." After finishing speaking, Mr. Tam took out a wrapping of paper and handed it to Su. Mr. Tam said, "I also prepared some food, if you two are hungry later, just let it go." Receiving the paper bag from Mr. Tam's hand, Su respectfully said, Uncle Tam is so thoughtful." Mr. Tam smiled. "That's all for you too, I have to go home now." "Yes, please rest assured, Mr. Tam." The two brothers said in unison and said goodbye to Mr. Tam. As time passed, the lights from the surrounding households were blown out, leaving the yard with an extremely lonely space. Without that, the night dew and temperature now began to cover the area. The gentle breeze carrying cold air occasionally passed by, making the two brothers feel uncomfortable. Sue turned and said, "Do you feel cold when you sit, Ty?" Ty crossed his arms and rubbed his chest and turned to answer. "Just put on a thin shirt and now it's a bit cold, Mr. Sue." Sue nodded. "How about you run home and get a temporary shirt here? It's convenient to go check the situation." Ty hesitated a bit, but then nodded in agreement. In his hand was a vague oil lamp and a hand-tied stick. Ty returned home alone. On the way, the darkness covered the space and the terrifying silence also made Ty feel a bit sad and walk faster and faster. This also created rustling noises that sounded like someone was there or following behind. Grrr, woof, howl. Ty stopped and stood still. Somewhere not far away suddenly a dog barked and howled in an extremely terrifying sound. Tork, tork. Next, rustling sounds echoed in Ty's ears. Although Ty's face is now very tense, the way home is not far away, but he still chooses to stay to see what it is. Turning around to follow those strange sounds, Ty walked about 20 steps and came to a corn garden of a household in the village. He stopped and raised the oil lamp to his eye level, with his other hand gripping the wood tightly. Swish, swish. The rustling sound was now becoming clearer and clearer. Ty took a deep breath and slowly walked into the corn bed. Bump, bump. Ah. Ah. The lamp and piece of wood that Ty was holding in his hand fell to the ground. He screamed loudly and then turned around and ran away. The sweat on Ty's face was now pouring out more and more, not knowing that Ty had "What did I see that made me so scared?" Just run, Ty. Ran straight to his house, opened the door, rushed inside the house and jumped straight into his bed. The loud noise caused by Ty also woke up Ty's mother. She got out of bed and lit the oil lamp. Seeing the door wide open, she went out and closed it. Then she went to Ty's room and raised her voice. "Ty, is Ty coming back?" Ty lay trembling on the bed as if still unable to regain his composure from what he had witnessed earlier. He did not answer. Seeing there was no response, Ty's mother got worried, pulled the curtain and walked in. Seeing Ty trembling, Ty's mother frowned and quickly walked over to her child. She patted Ty's body and continued. "Ty. Ty, what's wrong with you?" At this moment, Ty seemed to have regained his composure. He sat up and looked at his mother, his face sad, sweat dripping down his face. Ty stammered. Mom, our village has a ghost." Ty's words left Ty's mother so shocked that she couldn't say another word. At the yard, Sue was worried because he had waited too long. He thought and silently blamed him. Will Ty ever stay at home? Thinking over and over again, the temperature of the night sky now made Sue unable to bear it anymore, so he left the yard and decided to return to Ty's house to investigate. But he had only left the yard for a while when Sue heard shouting. "Fire, it's on fire. Everyone put out the fire." Immediately abandoning thoughts of Ty's house, he ran back to where the shouting came from. Right now, the corn garden is burning fiercely. 5 or 6 people are constantly carrying water in and out to put out the fire. Unable to stand by and watch, Sue also rushed in with everyone to extinguish that fierce fire. A while has passed, the fire has now been extinguished, but the corn garden is now only a pile of ashes and ruins. After the owner of the corn garden put out the fire, he knelt down, his eyes now lifeless and disappointed. "Oh my God, isn't my family difficult enough? Who would be cruel and unscrupulous and burn down my entire corn garden like this?" Sue and a few people present also helped and encouraged the owner of the corn garden to calm down. Immediately thinking of Ty, Sue said nothing and ran straight home. Returning to Ty's house, seeing that the house was locked, Sue raised his voice and called out, "Ty! Ty, are you at home?" It took 3 or 4 calls like that for a light from an oil lamp to light up inside the house. The person who opened the door was Ty's mother with a face full of worry. Noticing something unusual, Sue asked, "Auntie, what's wrong? Why do I think your face doesn't look good?" Ty's mother nodded. "Ty, go inside the house first." Sue didn't say anything but kept a puzzled expression on his face and then stepped inside the house. Inside, Sue looked around as if looking for Ty. Ty's mother now closed the door and went in and sat down opposite Sue, her face and voice were worried. This village is in trouble, my child." Before Ty's mother's words, Sue still did not understand what was going on, so he asked, "What do you mean by that? Why are you in trouble?" Before Ty's mother could answer, there was a noise. From his room, Ty slowly walked out, his demeanor was still trembling as if he could not calm down. Seeing Ty come out looking like that, Sue was surprised and asked, "Ty, what's wrong with you?" Going to sit next to his mother, Ty tremblingly replied, Our village has ghosts, Mr. Sue. History has never encountered ghosts before, but people say that no matter how sacred they are, Sue has not mentioned anything about this issue." Sue asked, "Ghosts, what are you talking about, Ty? Where are the devils?" Ty put his head down as if he was very confused, but immediately he raised his face and said, "Mr. Sue, you have to believe me, I saw that demon with my own eyes. It looked like a long-dead corpse coming back to life. The demon, it was really scared." Ty spoke while trying to describe the demon's appearance to Sue. As for Sue, judging by Ty's facial expression he was also half doubtful and half confused. Sue asked, "Calm down, where did you see that demon?" Ty slowly raised his arm to point outside, his eyes still looking at Sue's direction but not daring to look outside. "I saw it appear in the corn garden. It was still munching on the chicken. So scary." Mentioning the corn garden, Sue immediately thought of the fire earlier. Sue's eyes changed strangely and he asked, "In the corn garden nearby, right?" Ty nodded repeatedly. Yes. Sue continued asking, "Do you know what just happened in the corn garden?" As he spoke, Sue looked around as if looking for something. As for Ty and his mother, after hearing Sue's question, they looked confused and asked again, "Did something just happen in the corn garden?" What is you, Sue?" Sue sighed, his eyes now somewhat suspicious. "There was a fire in the corn garden just now, everything was burned down." After hearing this, Ty and her mother were startled. Before they could say anything, Sue continued, "Where is your lamp and your stick, Ty?" Knock, knock. Ty, Sue. Before he could answer Sue's question, there was a knock on the door outside, accompanied by a call that sounded like Mr. Tam from the village school. Is that Uncle Tam? Ty's mother blurted out, then stood up and ran to open the door. When he opened the door, it was indeed Mr. Tam, and there was also Mr. Ton with him. Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton entered the house and saw Ty and Sue sitting there. Walking over to them, Mr. Tam asked with a worried face, "What kind of two guys on duty let the corn garden burn down like that? But why are you two at home like this?" Mr. Tam's words were somewhat reproachful, but without knowing what the situation was, Sue could only stand up and admit his mistake. "I'm sorry, because it was so cold, my brothers and I tried to go home to get another shirt, who would have thought?" When Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton heard Sue say that, they didn't know what to do, because anyway, they couldn't put all the responsibility on the children. As for Ty, he has now calmed down a bit and thinks about the questions of Mr. Tam and Sue. He secretly understood that if he told about the demon now, not only would Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton not believe it, but he would also blame the burned corn garden on him. "Ty, what's wrong with your face?" Mr. Ton seemed to see that Ty's performance was not good, so he asked a question. A little confused, Ty stammered, "Ah, well, it's nothing, it's because the weather isn't good." Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton stood up with sad faces. Everything was getting more and more confusing, possibly giving this elderly man a headache. Mr. Tam said, "Well, there's no need to look after anything anymore, you two just stay home and rest." Having finished speaking, Mr. Tam and Mr. Ton stood up, asked Ty's mother for permission, and walked out of the house. In the darkness, the figures of two men gradually faded and disappeared. With 3 people remaining, Sue turned to look at Ty, who was bewildered. "Did you make up a ghost story to cover up the cornfield fire that caused damage to the village, Ty?" Sue's voice was somewhat angry. When Ty heard this, he was startled and turned around to explain. "Mr. Sue, what are you talking about? You and I have been playing together since we were little. Don't you understand my personality? Even though I have been naughty, but absolutely never vandalism does not affect others." Ty's mother was also a bit surprised. "Ty is right, you two have been close since childhood to adulthood, you should know best what his personality is like." Ty's mother's eyes looked at Sue with a bit of sadness, begging Sue to believe in Ty's words. Feeling a little moved, Sue sat down to think. Just as Ty and her mother are explaining, Ty is a somewhat mischievous person, but he never harms others. Moreover, from a young age, whenever something happened, he was responsible and took the blame. The fact that the corn garden burned down. Sue looked at Ty and her mother. "So now can you tell me everything that happened?" Ty's face looked a bit better. Ty began to narrate the incident. "At that time, when I returned to get more clothes, going to the corn garden, I suddenly heard a dog howling, followed by rustling sounds. Those unusual things kept ringing in my ears, making it impossible for me to continue walking, so I turned back to take a look. As I entered the corn beds, the rustling sound became clearer and clearer, which encouraged me to continue, and then..." Ty stopped the story he was telling, as if he was afraid of something invisible. This action of Ty made Sue even more curious. "Will you continue telling me, Ty?" "Ty. The sight of a person, no. A dead body, clothes torn, skin peeling off, eyes black, hands with long claws grabbing a chicken and munching on it. It makes me scared. Just thinking about it makes me dare not go out anymore." History had to urge Ty to continue telling his story. After listening to what Ty told him, Sue kept a thoughtful expression for a moment and then spoke. "So why don't you go home?" Ty nodded and replied, Yes, I was so scared that I left everything behind and ran home without daring to go out again. Sue nodded. So it's very possible that the reason the corn garden burned down was because you left the lamp there, and about that demon, the thing you saw, we will need to find out more to be able to tell you. Tam finds a solution. Ty didn't say anything. Sue's speculations about the burned corn garden all matched Ty's situation. This made Ty bow his head apologetically. As for Ty's mother, she saw that this matter could not last long, so she spoke up. "Dear Sue, you must immediately report this matter to Uncle Tam to find a solution. The longer it takes, the more difficult it will be to resolve." Sue looked at Ty's mother. He was a bit confused about this decision of hers. If he told it, how many people would believe Ty's story was true, and how many people would blame all the responsibility for the corn garden on Ty? Even the loss of Mrs. Lean's chickens can be blamed on Ty. Seeing that Sue did not answer, Ty's mother continued. "Don't you believe Ty? Don't believe me? If we don't find a way to capture that demon, there will be a big disaster in the village, a very big disaster, my child." Sue stood up. He looked at Ty and his mother. "Auntie and Ty, rest a bit and wait for the morning. I'll go home now to think more." Without waiting for Ty and his mother to say another word, Sue turned around and went outside. Because their house was next door, just a few steps up, Sue returned to his house. When he got home, he lit the oil lamp and then lay down on the bed, his hand on his forehead, thinking about what had happened. What should I do? History asks itself questions. It's true that it's extremely difficult for you to make a decision right now. He didn't know how to explain this so that Mr. Tam and everyone would believe that a ghost appeared and avoid part of Ty's responsibility. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. While thinking, suddenly the oil lamp was blown out by the wind. Looking out, Sue had forgotten to close the door when he returned. He got out of bed and gradually walked towards the door, but when he got there, Sue's legs stiffened and his eyes widened in horror. In front of Sue's eyes is now a silhouette, under the dim crescent moonlight. That shadow is jumping step by step. Having the courage to take a deep breath, Thursday slammed the door shut and turned around to lean his back against the door, his face now starting to be covered with drops of sweat. Ty. Ty is right. Turning around and locking the door tightly, Sue then turned back to light the oil lamp again. He sat in front of the oil lamp and focused on listening to every sound. He was afraid that thing would discover him and come in. Here it is. Engrossed in thought and hesitation, Sue also began to get tired and propped himself up on his hands and fell asleep on the table. Oh, oh, oh. The early morning rooster crows signaling the beginning of a new day. Sue also woke up now, leaning his hands off the table. Sue took a breath and felt lucky because it was morning. Immediately thinking of what he saw last night, Sue didn't say a word but opened the door and ran outside. Looking over at Ty's house, the door was also open. He immediately washed his face and ran over there. The door was only slightly closed. Sue thought that Ty's mother had something to do and had gone out early, not paying attention, but opened the door and walked inside the house. As soon as he stepped inside the house, Sue saw Ty sitting inside. He found it a bit strange, so he asked, "Don't you have any rest, or why are you sitting here so early, Ty?" Ty turned around and replied, "My mother just woke me up from the drama and I can't sleep anymore, and last night's events made me think a lot, Mr. Sue." After saying the sentence, Ty sighed and changed his expression. Ty asked, "What's wrong with you? Why did you come to my house so early?" Sue now sat down opposite Ty, and personally poured a cup of warm water. Sue said something very important. Holding up the cup of water, Sue looked at Ty with a serious look. What you saw last night? I've seen it too. Today I came here so early to ask you to come with me. As soon as Sue finished speaking, Ty's eyes lit up a bit. Maybe he was happy because someone believed what he said. But that look didn't last long before he lowered his eyes and Ty said, "But where are you going?" Sue replied, "Going to Uncle Tam's house to discuss a solution," like what she said. I also started to feel worried. This matter couldn't go on any longer. But, Ty responded with concern. As if he knew clearly what Ty was worried about, he continued, "Don't worry about the corn garden burning down. I will tell everyone nicely. The immediate matter is important." Receiving Sue's words, Ty seemed to be less worried, staring at Sue. Ty nodded with a serious expression. "Yes, so let's go to Uncle Tam's house now." Sue looked outside and saw that the sky was now bright. He nodded. "Yes, let's go." After saying that, Sue made another cup of water and then stood up and went outside. Ty now also went into his room, put on a shirt and went out immediately after. Closing the outside gate, both brothers hurriedly went to Mr. Tam's house. Along the way, the two brothers encountered a few people. They were chatting loudly about the corn garden fire. A few people saw the two's hasty behavior and asked questions, but the two brothers didn't pay any attention and just answered, "Let go and move on. Go to Mr. Tam's house." Thap stood in front of Mr. Tam's door. Sue walked up and called out loudly, "Uncle Tam, is Uncle Tam home?" Right after that, there was a creaking sound from inside, and Mr. Tam's wife was coming out of the house. "What's the matter with you two meeting Uncle Tam?" Raising her hand to open the gate, Mr. Tam's wife asked. Sue replied, "We have something to tell Uncle Tam, but Uncle Tam hasn't woken up yet." Opening the gate to the side, Mrs. Tam replied, "Because of Mr. Tuan's corn garden burning down, Uncle Tam came home late last night. He was thinking until the early hours of the morning before he could blink a bit, so you two go inside." "Yes," the two brothers said in unison and walked into the house together. Once inside the house, Mr. Tam's wife also walked in immediately. She asked two people to sit on the chair to drink water and then went into the inner room to call Mr. Tam. Mr. Tam, wake up and there's Sue and Ty looking for you." Mrs. Tam's call echoed outside, and soon Mr. and Mrs. Tam also came out. Seeing Sue and Ty coming to look for him, Mr. Tam asked, "What's the matter with you two coming here so early?" Waiting for Mr. Tam and his wife to return to their seats, Sue politely replied, "What I want to tell you is actually very unbelievable, but for the sake of the village's safety, Ty and I must come here to discuss this matter with you." Seeing that it was somewhat serious, Mr. Tam was surprised and continued to ask, "Go ahead, you two are already here anyway." Sue looked at Mr. Tam tentatively, then took a deep breath and said, "There are ghosts in our village." Immediately after Sue's words, Mr. and Mrs. Tam's husband and wife gasped. "What do you say, Sue? But, what is a ghost? What is this?" Still looking at Mr. Tam and his wife, Sue slowly began to tell Mr. Tam and his wife what he had seen last night. After that, he also told the story of Ty's encounter. All out. After listening to the two people's story, Mr. Tam looked thoughtfully at his wife as if to ask for her opinion. Mrs. Tam now looked shocked and scared. Perhaps at that time, when modern technology had not yet developed, rural people's knowledge was still ancient, demons and spirits were still something extremely scary. Mrs. Tam held her husband's hand, then turned to look at the two brothers Ty and Sue. "Are you two telling the truth? You and your husband must trust us, we will never make fun of the village's affairs." History seriously responded. Mrs. Tam turned to Mr. Tam. "I believe the kids are telling the truth, this. Mr. Tam did not say anything but lowered his eyes, his face clearly showing concern. Everyone looked at Mr. Tam like that, but no one dared to speak. They all seemed to wait for an opinion from this man. A moment passed, then Mr. Tam raised his eyes to look at everyone, then slowly said, "Things related to abnormal spirituality, we will not be able to solve in the usual way." Everyone was still listening. Mr. Tam continued. "Now in our village there is also Mrs. Ton, who has been a fortune teller for a long time. Wait a little later, we will go over there to ask her to see if there is any way to solve this problem." As soon as Mr. Tam finished speaking, Mrs. Tam grabbed her husband's hand and said, "Mrs. Ton, she works as a fortune teller, but doesn't know anything about eliminating demons. If you go there, you will only expose the story and the villagers will talk more." After Mr. Tam's wife finished speaking, the two brothers, Sue and Ty, also spoke up. "What you said is right, Uncle. Now, if this matter is let to the villagers, I'm afraid something bigger will happen." With everyone's comments, Mr. Tam lowered his eyes to think. "It's true, as everyone said, this is a spiritual story that is half suspected and half true. If this rumor gets out, I'm afraid this village will become even more chaotic." Mr. Tam turned to look at everyone and asked, "So do you guys have any opinions?" The Su-Tai brothers were silent as if they still didn't know what to do. Mrs. Tam was different. Mrs. Tam said, "In town, there is a very talented teacher Duong. He specializes in eliminating demons and is famous everywhere. I think it would be better if we went up there to ask him for help. The road from this village to the town is quite far. If the road is convenient, it will take nearly half a day to get there. I'm afraid that because of this inconvenience, the teacher will refuse." Mr. Tam said, "From here it takes half a day to get to town. I'm afraid that if I get there and won't be able to invite a teacher." Everyone remained silent. This issue seemed to be an awkward thing for everyone. Before anyone could speak, Mr. Tam stood up, his face suddenly determined. "But this may be the only way we can do it, so we can prepare a little later. This morning I will leave to invite the teacher." Seeing Mr. Tam like that, Sue did not hesitate at all. He stood up, looked at Mr. Tam and said, "Then I will go with you, anyway it will be safer for the two of us to go." Mr. Tam looked hesitant, but immediately nodded in agreement. "Okay then, let's go together." Turning to look at his wife and Ty, Mr. Tam continued. "While Sue and I went to invite the teacher, she and Ty stayed at home to tell everyone to pay attention, and we absolutely must keep this a secret. The reason is clear to everyone." Mrs. Tam and Ty nodded slightly in agreement. Mr. Tam was satisfied. "Everything here is over, Sue, sit here and wait for me to prepare, then you and I can go." Mr. Tam spoke toward Sue. Somewhat suddenly, Sue said, "So go ahead and prepare, I also have to prepare a few things before leaving." Mr. Tam nodded. "So you two go home and get ready, we'll meet you at the beginning of the village later." "Yes." The Sue brothers responded and then asked permission to go home to prepare. On the dirt road returning home, Ty's face was restless. "You two, You and I should go home early, or if that demon comes back tonight." With hasty footsteps, Sue replied, "Don't worry too much, just do your job well at home." "Yes." The two brothers continued walking, but after a few steps, Sue stopped as if realizing something. Sue said, "I also know about this. When I get home I have to inform my aunt to keep this a secret." Ty nodded. "Yes, don't worry." At Mr. Tam's house. Right after Ty and Sue left, Mr. Tam also went into the inner room to prepare some essential items such as dry food, water, and even some copper coins. While Mr. Tam was still preparing, Mrs. Tam also stood next to him and said, "If you're going on a long journey, remember to be careful. If you're tired, rest a bit or else you'll fall out again." Sue can't worry about it. Mr. Tam looked at his wife and nodded. "Don't worry, having Sue with me makes me feel secure, just." Mr. Tam stopped. As said before, the only thing Mr. Tam is worried about is that if he can't invite the skilled teacher back here, then everything will be resolved. Mrs. Tam noticed her concerns and encouraged her. "Don't worry, everyone says that the teacher is very good. Come on, I believe that the teacher will accept the invitation to come here with the two of you." Mr. Tam did not say anything more but continued his preparations. The sunlight was getting higher and higher. At the beginning of the village, the two brothers Sue and Ty were also standing there waiting for Mr. Tam. On Sue's shoulder was a heavy bag that looked like it had been carefully prepared. Bisexual. From a distance, Mr. Tam's figure also carried a bag on his arm, walking closer and closer to where the two of them were. Stopping, Mr. Tam looked at both of them with serious eyes. "Uncle and nephew, let's go." Sue responded to Mr. Tam with a determined nod. After that, Mr. Tam and Sue turned back and told Ty to remember what had been discussed before leaving together. Due to the dry weather this season, the dirt road from the village to the town was also very easy to navigate. After a few hours of traveling, the two had passed through countless villages and fields, and their strength was limited. Goes down easily. There is a drink shop in front, let's come here and rest first. Mr. Tam pointed to the water shop located next to the banyan tree in front and said. His body felt tired. Sue nodded. Yes, we have come a long way. After speaking, the two went back to the cafe. As soon as they sat down on the chair, both of them vaguely heard the story being discussed by a few people present. I heard that teacher is very skilled from the town. I saw the way he performed the ceremony and knew he was skilled. The people here are talking about someone, and even use harsh words of praise. Immediately thinking of the person we were looking for, Mr. Tam turned to the water seller and started a conversation. Can I ask, what are people talking about here? The water seller was also very honest. In my village, there is a family whose child is possessed by a ghost. I heard that this family had to go up there to invite some teacher named Duong to help. Hearing the name of the teacher named Duong, the same name as the teacher that we were also looking for, Mr. Tam was very happy. Sue now also made an equally happy face. Let's go to the village, okay? If the teacher is gone, then. Before Mr. Tam could answer, the water seller continued. So you two are also looking for Mr. Duong? Mr. Tam nodded and replied to the water seller. There's nothing to hide, my family in the countryside is also having trouble. I was on my way up there when I heard this news and I was so happy. I'll send you all the money for the water bill. My niece and I will go to the village in case you come back. Gone. The water seller waved her hand. You two don't have to rush. Even if I go out, I'll go this way and not any other way. It's better for you two to just sit here and rest to regain your strength. A few people present who were curious also took the initiative to ask. So where are you two? What's going on in your family that requires you to look for a teacher? Mr. Tam felt a bit confused, so he just answered indifferently. My uncle and nephew are from Ha village, so far away that everyone probably wouldn't know. As soon as Mr. Tam finished speaking, a person sitting there pointed his finger and said, Teacher Duong is out there, the person you and I are looking for is there. Mr. Tam and Sue immediately looked away. In the distance was the silhouette of a small old man, wearing a white ao dye. His hair was also white and let loose, walking very slowly and gently. The more he looked, the more soulful he seemed. Sue pulled Mr. Tam's hand, his face slightly worried. Looking at Mr. Duong, how old is he? Mr. Tam raised his hand to stop. Can't see outside. After saying that, Mr. Tam took out a few coins from his pocket to send money to the lady selling water and did not forget to thank everyone here. The reason Mr. Tam did not sit at the bar to wait for the teacher to arrive is easy to guess. Mr. Tam did not want the village's affairs to be discussed by the world. Under a mile of old bamboo trees, Mr. Tam and Sue stopped the old teacher and bowed their heads and said respectfully, Yes. Hello, teacher. Teacher Duong saw two strangers blocking his path and squinted his eyes. You two are. Mr. Tam slightly lowered his face. There's nothing to hide, teacher, I are from Ha village. My village is also in the middle of growing up and I went to town to find you to help. Luckily, I met you here. Teacher Duong still kept his eyes looking in the direction of the two people as if he was probing. After a while, he spoke. Ha village, that village is very far away, the village must have had a big problem to come to me, right? Mr. Tam bowed his head and whispered. Yes, I really don't dare hide it from you, my village now, a demon is appearing, teacher. It's true that the master is very skilled, he hears about the devil but still maintains his composure, Master Duong replied. I have just expelled a family in this village. Now on the way back, I met two people again. It is also fate between us. Okay, I'll go with you two back to the village. When Mr. Tam and Sue heard that, their faces were very happy, but Sue suddenly became worried. The road from here to my village is very far, can you go? When Mr. Tam heard Sue say that, he was also worried and looked at Master Duong. Ha, don't worry, just looking at me like that, you young people are still very weak. Teacher Duong laughed loudly and walked past two people with worried faces. Looking behind him, Mr. Duong seemed to exude something very elegant and... Mr. Tam and Sue looked at each other in confusion for a few seconds, but then quietly followed Teacher Duong. In Ha village at the same time. Because they thought that Mr. Tam and Sue might not be able to return to Tai tomorrow, Mrs. Tam and Mrs. Tam followed the instructions discussed in advance and went to each house to remind everyone to pay attention in the evening. While reminding everyone, both of them also received countless questions about this matter. A few people in the morning saw Mr. Tam leaving the village carrying a bag and also asked Mrs. Tam questions. However, Mrs. Tam only replied that he had something to do in town and probably wouldn't be back until tomorrow. That's why I wanted to ask her to go tell everyone to pay attention, after all. There's nothing better than being on your own and taking precautions. Returning to the positions of Mr. Tam, Mr. Duong, and Sue. All three people have now traveled half the distance. The sunlight is now gradually sinking, causing the movement to drag along. Some time ago, Mr. Duong also asked about the whole incident that the village was facing. Mr. Tam and Su also answered without any concealment at all. From what he heard, Master Duong thought that this was a demon entering the field and advised the two of them not to worry too much because it is not difficult to eliminate this type of demon. When Mr. Tam and Su heard Master Duong say that, they felt much more secure. However, the three of them continued chatting leisurely on the road, making the journey back to the village feel much faster. However, when we arrived, the sunlight had already disappeared. The three stopped in front of the village. A strange darkness and quiet atmosphere enveloped them. Noticing that unusual thing, Mr. Tam was puzzled. Strange, why is the village suddenly so quiet today? Su also wondered about that, but immediately after that he exclaimed as if he suddenly remembered. Surely my aunt and Tai told everyone, didn't we just say that this morning? Mr. Tam nodded and turned towards Mr. Duong, his voice respectful. I'm tired from the journey, I'm going home now so you can rest. From the moment he stopped here until now, Master Duong has squinted his eyes and looked towards the village, seeming to be thinking about something strange. Then I'll trouble you two to lead the way. Teacher Duong nodded and said to Mr. Tam and Su. Yes, please teacher. Mr. Tam responded and led Master Duong back to his house. Arriving home, Mr. Tam stood outside the gate and called out. Grandma, Grandma, please open the door. Clack, clack. The sound of the door inside the house rang, and soon Mrs. Tam ran outside. Seeing her husband and Su leading an old man, Mrs. Tam's face looked suspicious and stiffened a bit. Ma'am, open the gate and let me and everyone else in. Mr. Tam had to urge Mrs. Tam to wake up and open the gate wide for everyone. Mr. Tam raised his hand. Please, teacher. Teacher Duong did not answer but nodded and went straight inside the house. After closing the gate, Mrs. Tam was able to pull it back because Su was behind, and Mrs. Tam asked quietly. Is that Mr. Duong, Su? Su nodded. That's right, bro. Mrs. Tam frowned as if a little disappointed. I thought Master Duong was still young, but now that he's this old. Su laughed. Don't worry, you just look like that, but you're very healthy. After traveling so far, your demeanor still looks stable as if it were nothing. Mrs. Tam nodded and told Su to go inside first. After closing the gate, Mrs. Tam also walked in right after. Inside the house, Mr. Tam is also making a pot of tea to serve to Master Duong. While pouring water into the kettle, Mr. Tam said, Teacher, take a rest and drink a cup of water first. Wait for my wife to come in so I can tell her to make something for you to use. Just then, Mrs. Tam and Su also walked in. Mr. Tam tried to speak up to his wife, but Mrs. Tam bowed. I thought if you two didn't come back today, I wouldn't cook anything, so now everyone just sit and rest for a while. I'll run down and cook the rice pot, it'll be done in just a moment. Mr. Tam was pleased to see his wife nodding. Su now also sat down next to Mr. Tam. Su said, Now that you've arrived, I'll ask your permission to let me go first. Mr. Tam grumbled. Why come back to this guy? Let's have dinner with me first. After all, I've been traveling all day and I'm tired. Master Duong finally spoke up. You just sit here. Anyway, I have something I want to ask you more clearly. Su's initial expression was a bit hesitant, but then he had to accept and listen. The pot of tea that had been brewed for a while had already steeped. Mr. Tam poured a cup for Master Duong and said, "Isn't it true that what you want to ask is?" Receiving the cup of water from Mr. Tam, Master Duong stroked his white beard and replied, "At first, when I heard you two tell me about the incident he was experiencing, I only thought it might be caused by a possessed demon, but when I got here, my thoughts were somewhat different." Mr. Tam and Sue suddenly looked worried and uneasy. Mr. Tam said, What do you mean, teacher?" History also spoke up. So it's not a ghost entering the field, teacher?" Teacher Duong slowly said. "Around the village there is a lot of negative energy surrounding. Not only that, there is also a lot of smell of death. If it were simply a demon in possession, it would not be possible to radiate so much." Master Duong continued, "But don't worry too much, you two, everything will be there. Wait until the good time comes and I will go around this village to look for signs, or maybe I'm too suspicious and speculate wildly." Teacher Duong didn't know if this statement was to reassure or intimidate the two of them. However, after listening, Mr. Tam and Sue's faces became even more worried. Sipping a cup of water, Mr. Tam calmed down. "But anyway, it's already dark now, and I've been traveling a long way all day today. If I go out to investigate at this time, I'm afraid it won't be good." History also spoke up. "Uncle Tam is right, teacher. Just rest and conserve your strength and then I'll go with you soon." Teacher Duong shook his head and smiled lightly. "Don't worry, you two, I'm used to things like this anyway. Finding out a little sooner will make things easier to deal with." Seeing that Teacher Duong was so determined, neither of them dared to say another word. The three of them sat and chatted for a while longer. Then Mrs. Tam also came from downstairs to carry the rice tray. Placing a tray of rice with vegetables, eggs and a few dried fish on the shelf, Mrs. Tam felt embarrassed. "Since I didn't buy anything for the house today, I only have these things left for me and you to use temporarily." Mr. Tam also shyly continued, "I sympathize, my family is not prepared today." Master Duong smiled and replied, It's okay. Seeing that the teacher had no intention of reprimanding him, Mr. Tam also felt relieved and stood up to invite the teacher. "Well, I invite you to come down for dinner." Teacher Duong nodded and left the dinner table. Sue also came down with everyone. While eating, everyone only asked back and forth about each other's daily lives but never mentioned anything about what was going on in the other village. Maybe it's because of the temptation to avoid food, no one will have an appetite when it comes to that thing. After finishing the meal, the three of them returned to the table to drink water together. Mrs. Tam now also moves the dinner tray downstairs. Pouring a cup of water for the teacher, Mr. Tam said, "When do you plan to go out?" Picking up the cup of water, Master Duong looked at the dark sky outside and replied, "Right now." Mr. Tam was a bit surprised by this haste. "Teacher, please rest for a while, then if there's anything, I'll go with you." Teacher Duong smiled and raised his hand to block. "No need, just stay home and rest and wait for news from me." Turning to look at Sue, Teacher Duong said, "I see that your temperament is very good, can you come with me?" "Yes." When Sue heard Master Duong's proposal, he did not refuse, but responded very willingly. When Sue accepted, Master Duong smiled extremely satisfied. He took a sip of water, then stood up and put it on his shoulder bag. Sue saw Teacher Duong's action and immediately stood up as well. "I go back to Mr. Tam, even though I want to go with him, his strength is limited. He has been tired all day after a long journey, and the teacher also said so, so I can only sit at home and give instructions. 2 people are more attentive and careful. Walking out of Mr. Tam's house, Mr. Duong spoke up. Now can you take me to the place where your friend saw the demon? Su agrees. Yes, please come this way. Leading Master Duong towards the place where the corn garden had burned down, the ground now only left piles of ashes and dry stalks, Su pointed his finger and said, "This is the place, teacher." Teacher Duong did not answer but looked sideways, then he reached towards the lamp that Su was holding. Su understood and gave the lamp to Master Duong. Holding the lamp, Master Duong walked in step by step. As he walked, he looked around as if he was looking for something. Swish, swish. Teacher Duong's eyes suddenly stopped. He held the lamp in his hand and sat down on the cornfield to examine it. Using his other hand to gently touch the ground, he then wiped a bit of dirt and brought it up before his eyes. Observing extremely carefully, Mr. Duong said, "Let's go home." Su stood next to hear Teacher Duong say that and felt confused. "Did you discover anything?" Teacher Duong nodded and turned around to leave. Su did not dare to stay but immediately followed. Leaving the cornfield, Su walked up to Master Duong and said, "My house is also right here. If you don't mind, I'll go home and rest for a while. Because right now, if I go to Uncle Tam's house, I don't think it's convenient." Teacher Duong nodded. "That's fine, you lead the way." "So let me go ahead and lead the way," Su said, reaching forward to take the lamp from Master Duong's hand. On the way back to Su's house, there were always rustling sounds that sounded like someone was watching them from behind. Teacher Duong seemed to have also noticed the rustling sound, but his expression was still quite calm, as if he didn't want to make a sound because he still didn't know what it was. Stopping in front of his house's gate, Su struggled to open the gate, not knowing if it was because he was in bad spirits or because it was dark. Inviting Mr. Duong into the house, Su put the lamp on the table, then quickly drank another cup. Su said, "There was a rustling sound as if someone was following me and I was so scared, teacher. Seeing that you didn't react, I closed my eyes and went away." Looking at Su's face, which was covered in sweat, was enough to understand that Su was not exaggerating. Master Duong reassured, "The sound that just came out is indeed coming from the person walking behind you and me, but that person is not a human." Su rolled his eyes. So that's the demon, right, teacher?" Teacher Duong nodded. "That's right." Su's face now looked even more shocked. "Drink another glass of water to calm yourself," Su asked. "But why didn't it attack me or you?" Teacher Duong smiled and replied, "This demon is still weak. Through my observations just now, I see that it can still only catch cattle, and I also said that you are a person with a very good temperament, even if you don't go. With me, that demon wouldn't dare attack you." After listening to Mr. Duong's words, Su nodded his head as if he understood. But right after that, Su asked again, "So why does he still follow you and me?" Su asked, his face revealing his confusion. Teacher Duong stared at Su. "Because when it stops looking for chickens and ducks, it will find you." After listening, Su was shocked. Seeing Su's attitude, Teacher Duong smiled again. "But we will find and eliminate it so that it avoids harming the people here. Don't worry, we have prepared everything." "But how can we eliminate it, teacher? We don't even know where that demon appeared from." Teacher Duong turned his eyes outside again, then he turned back and told Su, "I expected this. It's getting late now. you should take the opportunity to rest a bit. Wait until the cock crows, I will have something for you to do." Sue was a bit surprised by this condition of Mr. Duong. After all, he was still a guest, and moreover, a person of status. Sue hesitated. "How can it be? I see you're moving around a lot today, so why don't you just go to bed and rest? My strength is that of a young man, feel at ease." Master Duong said. "It's okay, tonight I need to prepare some necessary things. You should rest first to avoid bothering me." Only left alone sitting in front of the oil lamp, Master Duong slowly raised his hand to untie the knot of the basket's handle. Then he took out a small knife, an inkstone, a roll of red thread and a few yellow talismans that had never been drawn. Putting other things aside, Master Duong slowly sharpened the inkstone very gently, without making any noise at all. After grinding the ink, Master Duong used a small knife and then lightly cut a line on his hand. The cut caused blood to begin to flow. He clenched his hand and headed straight towards the inkstone. Blood began to drip straight down. Strangely, with only a few drops of blood, the black ink tray suddenly turned slightly red. Next, Master Duong gently held a talisman and a brush. He wiped the brush on the inkstone and began to draw, soft and extremely flexible. The first talisman was completed, Master Duong. Folding it into a triangle and putting it aside, he continued to draw 2, 3 and more, then folded it again into a triangle like the first talisman. After completing about 5 amulets, Master Duong's face looked a bit pale. He slowly gathered up the things on display and put them in his bag, then just sat there in the chair and closed his eyes. Oh, oh, oh. The sound of a rooster crowing signals the beginning of a new day. Inside your house. Sue also stirred and sat up. He looked around and didn't see Mr. Duong anywhere. The door was only slightly closed. Feeling a little worried, Sue slipped out of bed and went outside. As soon as he got outside, Sue saw Teacher Duong and Tai standing and chatting. Feeling a bit strange, he quietly walked to their location. As soon as he saw Sue coming, Tai looked happy. "Mr. Sue, are you awake?" Teacher Duong also turned to look at Sue. He smiled and said, "Just now, while I was sitting inside the house, I heard this young man calling for the gate and was curious to come take a look. It turned out that he was the one who saw that demon directly." Sue still hadn't had time to say anything when Tai continued. "I also planned to get up early and go to the village to wait for you and Uncle Tam to return, but as soon as I got outside, I saw a light in the house trying to call out. Who would have thought that you and Uncle Tam had already returned yesterday evening?" Looking at Mr. Duong with a forced smile, Tai continued. "When I saw the teacher open the gate, I thought it was someone else." Sue nodded and said, "Yes, you just look like that, but your health is very good." Turning to Mr. Duong, Sue respectfully said, "It's early in the morning and the air isn't good. Why don't you come inside?" Teacher Duong nodded and turned to go inside. Everyone entered the house. Sue spoke up. "I wonder if you have any solution for what happened last night?" Teacher Duong nodded and looked at the two brothers. "We already have the way, but we need everyone's help." "Yes, just say it, we can do anything." "Mr. Sue is right, teacher." Sue and Tai responded excitedly. Teacher Duong nodded, his voice low. "Then wait for the village chief to come and then we will discuss." Just as I mentioned it, there was a knock at the door outside. None other than Mr. Tam. Opening the gate, Sue asked, "Uncle Tam came so early?" Mr. Tam walked in. "Well, I was also worried about that class, so I quickly got up and ran over here to try." Yes. Responding to Mr. Tam's words, both uncle and nephew then turned around and went back inside the house. Look at everyone present. Master Duong picked up his bag, untied the knot, took out the talismans he had prepared last night and placed them on the table. These are 2 talismans that I have enchanted. Everyone please keep one for each person, just keep it in your body for now. Everyone bowed their heads to receive the talisman from Master Duong. Holding the neatly folded talisman in his hand, Tai turned to look at Su. It looks exactly like the peace talismans that your mother often asks for at your temple. Turning to look at Mr. Duong, Tai asked, "Is this a peace charm, teacher?" Teacher Duong smiled and nodded as an answer. Folding the talisman neatly into his body, Mr. Tam now spoke up. "Did you check and discover anything last night?" Teacher Duong nodded. "Basically, I already know a little bit about that demon. If my guess is correct, tonight I will launch a battle to eliminate that demon for everyone." When Mr. Tam heard that, his face was filled with joy. "Thank you for everything, teacher. The time of a long day has finally passed. The sunlight has now disappeared, darkness has begun to cover this peaceful countryside. The people present at Su's house now all have a feeling of anxiety and nervousness." Master Duong took out a roll of red thread that had been pre-soaked with Chinese ink and the previously burned talisman. He gave it to the 2 brothers Su and Tai and said, "You 2 take this roll of red thread, wait until tonight to use it according to my instructions." Su received the roll of red thread. His face was a bit confused, but he didn't dare to ask about it. Next, Master Duong took out a powder he had stored in a small bottle and said, "Now help me carry this jar of powder outside, then pour the powder in a circle in the yard, as long as it's enough to surround one person. Remember, don't leave a single spot missing." Continuing to receive the bottle of powder from Mr. Duong's hand, Su asked permission and then went outside to the yard to perform his task. Now only Mr. Tam, who didn't know what his mission was, asked, "Teacher, so what will I do?" Teacher Duong smiled and replied, "You will be the one to lure that demon here." When Mr. Tam heard Teacher Duong say that, he was startled. He waved his hand and shook his head. "No. That's not possible, teacher. How can I do this at my age?" When Tai was sitting there, seeing Mr. Tam act like that, he also burst out laughing. He patted Mr. Tam on the shoulder. "This is the first time I've seen you so scared, WH. KH. Master Duong said. "Don't worry, I can guarantee that that demon will not dare to touch you." When Mr. Tam heard this, he felt a little more reassured. He asked, "But how to entice, teacher?" Teacher Duong looked at Mr. Tam silently for a moment, then took out his small knife and placed it on the table. "Demons love the smell of blood, and I want you to use your blood to lure this demon here." Mr. Tam hesitated a bit. "But after all, it's also helping the village escape disaster, so what's the point of a little danger?" Mr. Tam nodded. "Okay, I will lure that demon here." Teacher Duong nodded with satisfaction. Su then finished his work and went inside the house. Only holding the empty bottle in his hand, he said, "I have finished everything, teacher." After listening, Teacher Duong nodded and stood up to go outside the steps. He looked at the circle that Su had scattered and then returned to the house. "Very good, everything is prepared like that." Teacher Duong knuckled his hands, then continued. "Now, if anyone wants to take a nap, please take a nap, because tonight is going to be a long one." Teacher Duong said that, but in this house now, no one can rest leisurely. Some people are worried, others are excited to eliminate that demon. Sue said. So when will we proceed, teacher? Master Duong leisurely replied. In the middle of tonight, that's when that demon will appear. After waiting forever, it finally reached the middle of the night, and Mr. Duong considered it was time. He stood up and went outside. Everyone guessed that this was a good time to go outside and follow Mr. Duong. The space in the middle of the night is different. Besides the darkness and the cold wind, nothing else exists. Suddenly, Mr. Duong turned around. He stared at Mr. Tam and said, "The talisman I gave you, do you still keep it with you?" Mr. Tam nodded and placed his hand on his chest. "I still keep it here, teacher." Teacher Duong nodded. "Now go outside, then just make a small cut in the palm of your hand and wait a bit. When there is danger I will remind you to come back." Mr. 8 looked at everyone for a moment as if to gain some courage, then took Master Duong's small knife and slowly walked out the gate and gradually disappeared into the darkness. The remaining 3 people, Sue and Tai, also began to worry about Mr. Tam. They both asked Master Duong, "Are you sure he will be safe?" Teacher Duong nodded. "You two can rest assured, I dare to guarantee this." After speaking, Teacher Duong glanced around the yard. He saw a well in the corner and slowly walked closer. Sue and Tai also slowly followed. Stopping at the well, Master Duong turned back to look at the 2 people and said, "Now you two take my roll of red thread and fill it up here. When I give the signal, use this roll of thread to tie up that demon." "Yes." Sue and Tai responded foolishly. Teacher Duong turned around and started going inside the house. He sat on the chair, crossed his legs and closed his eyes tightly. In other developments, Mr. Tam had now walked some distance. It was cold. The sound of the wind rustling around him also made him feel a bit nervous. He still didn't know where to go when a voice suddenly rang out in his head. "Okay, you can stop here." When the sound of the voice rang out, Mr. Tam was scared and stiffened his legs, but then he heard Teacher Duong's voice and he felt reassured. In his mind, he secretly wondered how Master Duong could do this. "Just make a small cut on the palm of your hand." Teacher Duong's voice rang out again. Mr. Tam put aside his thoughts and did it. Swoosh! Mr. Tam gritted his teeth and endured the sudden pain. The blood in his palm also began to drip down. Mr. Tam said into the dark space, "Can I go home yet, teacher?" "Don't rush, please stay there a little longer." Mr. Tam stood alone in the darkness for a while longer when suddenly he heard strange sounds. Rustle, rustle, grrr. Just at this moment, Teacher Duong's voice rang out urging him. "Okay, you can go home now, don't be afraid, just stay calm." Mr. Tam's face was now blue without a drop of blood. He knew that evil thing had appeared very close to him, but because of the mission, he also mustered all his courage and tried to pretend that he was fine. At History's house, Mr. Duong, who was sitting motionless, opened his eyes and lowered his legs. He slowly walked to the door, half closed it and remained silent inside to observe. What he was concerned about right now was that the demon would most likely follow. "Mr. Tam is here." "There it is," Teacher Duong muttered when he saw Mr. Tam in front of him. Behind him was a shadowy figure. The gate was not closed and Mr. Tam just walked straight in, until Mr. Tam stopped at the main door and tried to raise his hand to open the door, but from inside, Mr. Duong gently opened it and closed it to a corner. Quietly, Mr. Tam stepped inside. The door was once again ajar. Teacher Duong still kept his eyes watching through the crack in the door. Mr. Tam knew that Teacher Duong was concentrating and did not dare to disturb him. Outside, the demon's appearance became more and more clear. It crept in like a thief with a scary appearance, slowly entering. His face was peeling and black, his hands and feet were rotten. Stepping into the yard, he looked sideways, his face upturned, observing all around the house as if searching. Boom, boom, boom. The circle that Su sprinkled from the bottle of powder that Master Duong gave him suddenly flashed and then burned fiercely. Grrr from. The demon was now standing in a circle. The fire surrounding it was burning so fiercely that it felt uncomfortable and wanted to escape, but every time it wanted to cross, it retreated and roared as if it had encountered some kind of force. Somehow invisible. In the house, Teacher Duong and Mr. Tam now held their bags, opened the door and slowly walked out. As he walked, Master Duong recited very small mantras in his mouth. It seems like these spells are controlling that fierce fire. In the ring of fire, the demon showed extreme pain and roared louder and louder, its rotten flesh slowly flowing down piece by piece. Su and Tai were now standing ready, each holding one end of the rope, waiting for Master Duong's orders. The two looked very confident at the weak demon. But before anything could be done, the fire that restrained the demon began to fade. Turning to look at Mr. Duong, he suddenly bent over and placed his hand on his chest, seemingly in pain. Everyone's face clearly showed their concern. The demon saw that the situation was in his favor, endured the pain and rushed through the dying fire. It turned its hateful and disgusting eyes towards Teacher Duong and Mr. Tam and then immediately rushed forward. At this time, when Tai and Tai are in a bad situation, they can't think much. Su said, "I hope this rope from Master Duong works." As soon as he finished speaking, Su rushed forward as fast as lightning. Tai understood what he meant and also rushed out. The two used the red rope that Master Duong had cast a spell to rush to the demon's place. As soon as the rope touched, the demon jumped back. Both of them gained momentum, continued to stretch the rope and rushed forward. The demon did not give in. It roared and also rushed forward. But every time it rushed in, it bounced back. The demon had to turn around, jump out and gradually disappear into the darkness. At Tai's house. Tai's mother had also hidden behind the door to observe. Her heart could barely beat before what was happening just now. She also wanted to scream, but before that she had heard Tai's instructions, so she reluctantly obeyed. When everything was over, the demon also escaped. Everyone's disappointed faces seemed very quiet. They helped Mr. Duong into the house. Pouring another cup for Mr. Duong, Mr. Tam looked regretful. "Teacher, what happened? Why did you suddenly?" His face was pale. Master Duong also blamed himself a bit. He replied, "Sigh. My old illness has relapsed. I didn't expect it to happen at such an important time." Everyone looked down in regret over this incident. However, soon after, everyone regained their composure. More than anyone else, they understand the current situation and cannot criticize Mr. Duong's illness. Mr. Tam said, "Your health is not good, please rest first and recuperate first." Teacher Duong raised his hand to stop him and said, "That demon is probably weak now and can't run far yet. To avoid letting things drag on, now everyone has to chase it together." Everyone intervened when they saw that Master Duong's health was still not good. However, he dismissed them all and insisted on catching and eliminating it tonight. Holding up his bag, Master Duong steadily walked outside. based on the scent of death left by that demon on the way. Teacher Duong and everyone chased to an abandoned house at the far end of the village. It felt like this abandoned house was completely separate from everything around it. The smell of death around the house is now very evident. Mr. Tam looked worriedly at the abandoned house. "Is it here, teacher?" Teacher Duong nodded. "The smell of death in this house is thick. It's possible that the devil is lurking here, but..." Everyone was surprised to see Mr. Duong stop speaking. Sue asked, "Did you discover anything else?" Teacher Duong nodded. "I still feel there is still some vitality in this house. Don't wait for anyone to say another word." Teacher Duong stepped forward and slowly raised his arm to gently push the door. As soon as the door opened, an extremely strange scene met everyone's eyes, making everyone gasp. It's that demon that's covered in blood, but it's not alone. Next to it now is a baby estimated to be less than a month old. When the demon saw a few people coming, he hugged the baby, turned its face towards everyone, and roared in horror. It seems like this demon is protecting the child. What is this, teacher? This? Everyone asked Master Duong in bewilderment. Since he started his profession as an exorcist, Master Duong has never encountered such a confusing scene like this, and he doesn't know how to explain it. "Is it possible that this demon is going to eat this baby, teacher?" Mr. Tam asked with a worried face. Teacher Duong remained silent, observing the scene of the demon and the child. A thought gradually appeared in his mind at that time. Turning around to look at everyone, Mr. Duong said, "Everyone, please go outside, just leave me alone in here." Seeing that everyone had no reaction, Mr. Duong continued, "I have my own way, everyone please go out with peace of mind." Reluctantly, they all used defensive eyes and stepped back to exit the house. The door is closed. Everyone outside is worried about Mr. Duong. With my current health, I don't know what method Master Duong will use to eliminate it. The space was quiet, there was no movement at all, as if there was a fierce battle going on. Unable to continue waiting, Sue stepped up and said, "No, I can't keep waiting like this." Mr. Tam pulled Sue's hand back. "Everyone here is as worried as you are, but let's wait a little longer and see." Tai nodded at Mr. Tam's opinion. "Uncle Tam is right," he said so. The space returned to its original state, terrifyingly quiet. Clack, clack. The door of the house slowly opened, the figure of Mr. Duong slowly walked out, in his arms was a baby with a cute sleeping face. When everyone saw Master Duong coming out, they quickly ran over. They even looked inside the house, but the demon was nowhere to be seen. Everyone seemed puzzled. Mr. Tam spoke up. "Where is this child and that demon, teacher?" Sue and Tai had equally puzzled faces. "What happened in there, teacher?" Teacher Duong's eyes were satisfied. He smiled kindly, looked at the baby he was holding in his arms and said, "Motherhood is truly sacred." Turning to look at everyone, Mr. Duong continued, "Let's go back home, I still need to take care of this poor baby." The people present here have followed Master Duong from the beginning, but until now, when everything has ended, it seems they don't understand anything. Everyone's faces were bewildered. They wanted to know what Mr. Duong had done inside that house just now to make everything so easy, but he just smiled and replied, "It all depends on fate." Run out of